Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Our topic today is preventing back injuries with ergonomics, both at home and at work. We have Rachel Mitchell with us today, and we're super lucky to have her back again. My name's Rory. I will be the moderator for today's webinar, and before we get into the formal presentation, I'll just run through a few quick housekeeping notes. If for any reason you lose connection throughout the webinar, just give us a call at 1-800-667-9300 and one of our customer service representatives will be happy to help you get back online. If you're having issues with your audio, double check to make sure your speakers are turned on and you do not have any other applications or web pages trying to use your audio as well. Following today's presentation, we will have a recording of the webinar available on OHS Insider. And then finally, we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. However, feel free to submit any questions as you think of them. To submit a question, just hit the orange arrow to expand the GoToWebinar control panel. Press the questions drop-down bar, type in your question, and hit enter. That's all I have for housekeeping notes. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Rachel.
All right, thanks, Rory. So happy to be with you all again today. The plan today is to spend the next hour or so talking about back injuries, looking at sort of what we do at work, what we do at home, what are the things that put our back at risk, and what can we do to prevent those injuries. As mentioned, I'm happy to take some questions at the end. So I'll aim to be done kind of at that 1 hour mark or so, and then we'll do questions after that. As mentioned, my name is Rachel Mitchell. I'm a Canadian certified professional ergonomist, and I'm the manager of ergonomic services for Ergo Inc. I've been in practice for about 20 years now, the majority of which I've spent in consulting and in return to work roles. I work for Ergo Inc. Ergo Inc. is an ergonomics consulting company in southwestern Ontario, but now with sort of hybrid work and work from home and all of those things, we are doing work virtually with folks across the country in many cases. We work in a wide range of industries. These days, it's pretty hard to surprise us with a job that we haven't seen in some context. I spend about half my time doing office ergonomics and the other half in manufacturing and heavy industries and things like that. So without any further delay, let's get into the plan for today. So we're going to talk about why posture is important, why this is sort of a cornerstone of ergonomics and sort of protecting our back, and what is it about these postures that put us potentially at risk, and what are the postures that instead we want to try to work in order to protect our backs. And we'll look at some instances both at home and at work to see if we can apply these sort of principles of posture to a range of different scenarios. Because if we can form some general rules that we can apply to all aspects of life, then they become habit. It becomes a little bit easier to incorporate them into all of the things that we do. And then we'll finish up with some general tips sort of for health and wellness and sort of things above and beyond those work tasks that we can do to protect our bodies well into the future. So when we speak about poor postures, it seems pretty straightforward, but let's talk about what it is about these postures that place strains on our bodies. So we're talking about things like bending and stooping, working above shoulder height, reaching, whether it's reaching forwards or reaching sideways, twisting your neck, twisting your back, twisting your wrists, looking up, looking down. These are, all kind of fit into the realm of what we're going to be looking at today. So what is it about these postures that are problematic for us? Well, first and foremost, these are postures where the muscle strength is compromised. So these are postures where our muscles cannot function at their optimal levels. They don't generate force well. So if you twist your back muscles can't fire the way they should, and you're physically not as strong as you might have been in a more kind of straight and square posture. The second is that in some of these postures, we start to strain the ligaments. So you can see the figure sort of bent over, hunched over with the box in the top right-hand corner. When you lean forward like that, you stretch all of your back muscles. And what ends up happening is the weight of your body almost becomes suspended on the support of those ligaments. So the ligaments have to start holding the load instead of the muscles. Now, muscles are built to generate force, whereas ligaments are sort of elastic tissues. They can't generate force. They're not as strong. And so if you consider that half the weight, half your body weight sits above your waist, when you bend forward like this, even if all you have in your hands is a 10-pound weight, you're also supporting half the weight of your own body, again, oftentimes on these ligaments and in a position where the back muscles just can't generate a lot of force in order to stabilize your back and stabilize your spine. So when we put ourselves in these really awkward postures, we are forcing the back muscles to work harder, right? They have to generate more force in a less optimal position. And so the internal loading on the body is much higher. Now, to take kind of another example away from the back, if you were to, hold your coffee mug that's on your desk out in front of you and stretch your arm out at full length, you're supporting both the weight of your coffee mug, but you're also supporting the weight of your own arm, which weighs more than your coffee mug does. And so those muscles have to work harder because you're in this non-optimal position. So all of these things come together to, increase the risk of injury, increase the risk of kind of pain and discomfort, because our body cannot function nearly as well. We sort of are making ourselves less strong and then asking our bodies to kind of perform the same types of tasks. The other thing that happens is we also can get more compression through the spine. We put more pressure kind of through the discs in our spine when we're in some of these awkward postures as well. And when we're speaking about injury, kind of specifically in the context of ergonomics, we're most of the time referring to what we would call a musculoskeletal disorder. Now, these are disorders of muscles, tendons, ligaments, nerves, the soft tissues of the body, and they're disorders that result from cumulative wear and tear. So we're not talking about tripping and falling. Even when we consider instances where, someone drops a pencil, bends over, throws their back out, picking up a pencil, most of the time, it's not really picking up the pencil that resulted in that injury to the back. It's the, weeks and years of loading and wear and tear that we place on our back in those poor postures that sort of cause that final instance, that sort of proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, that resulted in that injury. So we really have to think of this in terms of, what we do every day, how much strain we put on our body, and, are we, starting to build this wear and tear over time that at some point, unfortunately, may catch up with us. The prevalence of low back pain in the population is about 7.5%. At any given time, 35% of the population may be living with low back pain. And most of the studies show that the prevalence of back pain sort of increases with age, although interestingly enough, only till the age of about 60 or 65, and then it starts to decrease. This may be a function that people are coming out of the workforce at that point in time, so maybe they're taking it a little bit easier. The prevalence of back pain is marginally higher in women as compared to men. And low back pain is the leading cause of years lived with disability, i.e. the most common cause of disability since the 1990s. And if you kind of look at the prevalence of back pain over time, it has been gradually increasing. So the theory is that the sort of prevalence of low back pain will be almost 1.5 times higher by the time we get to 2050, where hopefully all of us will be retired at that point in time. But it really is a substantial issue within the population. It's something that unfortunately does get most people. I have seen a stat that says that 80% of the population does suffer at least one incident of back pain at some point in time throughout their life. So it is very common. If we look specifically at injuries in the context of work, so I'm in Ontario here, so I speak in terms of the WSIB, but any kind of workers' compensation board, the number one cause of injury are strains and sprains. These are these musculoskeletal disorders. The number one cause is overexertion, and the most commonly reported body part is the low back. Now, I will say this has been the trend, the sort of strains and sprains to the low back for more than a decade, with only one exception, and that is that in 2020, the most common WSIB claim, maybe not any surprise, was not a sprain and strain. It was a whole body disorder related to COVID. Basically, like, I'm off work, my whole body is ill because I have COVID. So those two things did flip in that particular year. But it has sort of reverted back to its original status. We're back to low back strains and sprains. And most of the time, injuries to the low back are attributed to lifting, often in combination with poor posture. So let's look at kind of what a healthy back looks like and how we protect it. So a spine has sort of these natural curves in the spine. And so one of the things related to protecting our back is that we make sure that we maintain this natural curve. So things like rounding up the back place a lot more pressure on the discs of the spine. Now, if you can imagine that your spine is made up of these bony vertebrae, and between each bony vertebrae is a jelly donut, when you start to round the back, when you lean forward, you're putting more pressure on the front edge of your jelly donut than you are on the back. And we all can imagine what happens if you squeeze really hard on one side of a jelly donut, and that is that the jelly starts to migrate out in the direction you don't want it to go. Which at some point becomes something referred to as a bulging or herniated disc. So the sort of maintenance of this natural curve of the spine is really important to maintain good compression, sort of nice even compression through the discs. The other is that the spine is a really flexible structure. So it's the muscles of the back and the abdominals that lend rigidity and lend strength and can support the spine. So we need to ensure that our spines are strong. They also have some flexibility that's going to protect them, and then making sure we're kind of adding good posture and good body mechanics to the equation. So those are the three things we kind of need to keep in mind moving forward. Now, back pain is clearly an issue for a number of reasons. It can have effects on attendance at work. It has clear researched effects on productivity. People are less productive at work when they're uncomfortable and suffering from some amount of pain. But we don't want to undersell that this also affects people's abilities to participate in not just work, but also the leisure activities, the family activities that they do when they leave work. And having those things in your life is very important for, mental health as well, making sure that work balance is maintained and people don't go home from work and then just have to lie down because they've got terrible back pain. The other is that most people who suffer some sort of low back injury will be able to tell you that reoccurrence is very common. So people will say, oh, every year or so I throw my back out, it goes out on me again. We sort of hear this language related to reoccurrence. So trying to avoid it in the first place, or really kind of minimize those demands on the back, is really important to kind of preserve this, years down into the future. So let's look at what optimal posture looks like, and then we'll investigate it in some different contexts of both work and home life. So an optimal posture is a posture that is upright. It's a posture that is supported. So if you're sitting, it means there's a backrest or something behind you, where the arms are close to the body, right? So that the elbows are tucked in under the shoulder joint. This allows everything to kind of stack evenly through the spine and really puts us in a position to be able to generate maximum amounts of force. The muscles work well. We don't stress the ligaments. So these are the places we're sort of looking to get to. So how do we get into these postures when we're at work? So you'll see a similarity. This woman sitting in the chair is in the same posture that we just saw in that kind of ideal posture. So when we talk about work, we're going to be looking at, how do we avoid things like bending forward to look at a computer screen, reaching to the mouse, you know, twisting your head to look at a screen, keeping your head well balanced on your neck, your elbows tucked in, keeping your wrists straight and things like that in order to get these optimal postures into place. So some general rules of thumb, and for those of you who've sat in some of my webinars again or before, there's going to be a little bit of just sort of a refresher here about what an optimal computer workstation should look like, and then we'll move on to some other things. So a reminder that we're trying to achieve a sort of 90-degree posture. So that means 90 degrees at the knees, 90 at the hip, and 90 at the elbows. So something that you could try right now is first take a look down at your thighs. Is there a slope in your thighs, or do you feel like they're parallel with the floor? So if you could put a marble on your thigh, would it roll down towards your knees? That'll give you a sense of whether your thighs are parallel with the ground and whether you've achieved that 90-degree angle at the knees and at the hip. The next is to kind of tuck your elbows into your sides. So your elbow joint is just below your shoulder joint. Position your forearms parallel with the floor, so they are not on an upward angle, and see whether your fingertips land where your keyboard is, or are your fingertips lower than the height of your desk. You might find you need to kind of slide your chair back a couple of inches in order to really test this. So most desks are, you know, 29 inches as a standard desk, and if you're not 6'4", odds are that that desk is a little bit high for you. And so most of us solve this kind of in one of two ways. So the woman in this image you'll see is basically just typing at a lower surface than the man who's taller on the left. You can do this if you have an adjustable keyboard tray. For people who don't though, most of the time we just raise our chair up, we make it a little bit taller so that when we do that 90-degree bend at the elbow, our hands land nice and level on the desk surface. But that does mean then the feet have to be supported in this posture. You're basically taking the sort of short, petite female in the image and you're making her taller by rising her up and then putting something underneath the feet. So if you happen to be working at home, I'd encourage you to kind of consider the tables that are available to you. Ideally, if you can find something in the 26, 27-inch range, they often will do you better than something that's in the 29 or 30-inch range. And some people have been really creative. So we've seen people using an ironing board, like in the example here, where your keyboard and your external mouse go on the ironing board and then your monitor is up on the desk. I just saw somebody who was using a little IKEA table, like almost like a couch sort of TV table for their keyboard and their mouse. And then again, the monitor was up on the taller desk. There are clamp-on keyboard trays. You're just trying to ensure that you have done whatever you can to get that keyboard and mouse level with your seated elbow height. Now, if you've got one surface and that's all that's available and you've had to raise your chair up in order to position the keyboard at elbow height, then I'm going to remind you that you should have something underneath your feet to ensure that your thighs are parallel with the floor. So this can be a footrest. This can be a legal-sized pack of copy paper. I will caution against letter-sized paper. It's really not wide enough to hold both your feet. I realize Thanksgiving is coming up, so your turkey pan might be in use, but if you are not making a turkey, an upturned turkey pan also works well as a footrest. So lots of things available for you to support your feet underneath the desk if you're not in a position to, you know, go out and order a footrest, but the goal is to ensure that those thighs are parallel with the floor. The footrest sits just below your knees. It will likely bump into the wheels of your chair if you've got it in that kind of ideal position. Now, the next thing to consider is the chair that you're sitting in. So ideally, you're sitting in a chair that supports the body, that's got good back support, because we know an ideal posture is a posture that is well supported and has some height adjustability in the seat pan to help you get that keyboard and mouse at elbow height. Some added perks you might want is a chair with some tilt or a bit of recline, adjustable armrests, and maybe even adjustable seat pan depth. Once we get into sort of formal offices, especially offices with hybrid workstations or hoteling stations, we really like to see adjustable seat pan depths because it allows multiple people, tall, short, to all use the same chair and to optimize the fit for them. So consider kind of what you've got available, make sure you've got a really good fit. And I'd like you to sort of look down at your chair right now and consider whether you know what every button on your chair does. Most people will know what kind of 70 or 80% of the levers do, but there's often one that maybe you're not sure how it works. And I'd encourage you to make sure that you really understand what all of the features do, because if you don't, then you may not be as comfortable as you theoretically could be if you could just get those last few things tweaked. So we do have a video here. It's available on our website. It's a global tri-tech, but it is a very standardized office chair. So if you need a quick kind of how to adjust a chair video, you can take a look at that on our video and resource page. But most vendors, if you know what brand your chair is, will have a video that shows you how to adjust your chair. So make sure you take advantage of those things. Make sure your employees understand how to adjust chairs. You know, we do ourselves a disservice. We don't get the best bang for our buck when we provide people with chairs and don't take the time to really make sure they know how to use them well, because oftentimes people really just, they don't bother. They don't take the time. They just sort of learn how to make it go up and down, and they're not taking advantage of all of those features that you've paid for when you invest in chairs for your staff. Now, if you are at home and you have a limited sort of stash of chairs available, then pick the best you can. Pick something that's got a backrest, that's got some support, ideally that's height adjustable, but if it's not, try your kitchen chair, try your dining room chair, find the one that's going to get your elbows as close to the table surface as possible. So again, you can type at that kind of ideal elbow height table. You can use a rolled towel or a pillow to increase some of the support through your low back, but when you do so, make sure that your shoulder blades are still in contact with the chair. If you use a roll or a cushion that's too big and your upper back isn't touching the backrest, then now your back muscles have to work a lot harder to hold you up because you can't rest the weight of your back against the chair. Keep in mind again that half your body weight sits above the waist. So while sitting upright and kind of holding yourself in a really upright posture sounds like a great core workout, you know, the muscles really do fatigue. And so we want to sit in a position where the weight of our back is resting and supported against the chair, and those muscles can function at a lower relaxed level so that they don't fatigue so quickly. Now, with respect to your keyboard, I'm going to have you take a look down in front of you right now. Ideally, if you're on a laptop, you've got an external keyboard in use. If you don't, then that should be first on your things to acquire list. I also want you to look at it and see whether the letter N and the letter B are in front of your nose and your belly button, because that is the center of your keyboard. So you should be sitting in front of the sort of alphabet section of the keyboard, ignoring the number pad. Otherwise, you end up a little bit twisted when you type. Your keyboard should be at elbow height, and your upper arms should be vertical, which means your elbows are below your shoulder joint when you're typing, and your forearms are horizontal. So if your keyboard has feet, little kickstands on the back, and you are correctly typing at elbow height, you shouldn't be using the kickstands because they'll force your hands back and a bend into the wrist. So try without the kickstands, or maybe the slightly lower set of kickstands if you can, to see if you can get a little bit of a straighter angle at your wrist. If your table happens to be a little bit too high though, the kickstands, if your arms are already on an upward angle, can help a little bit to sort of mitigate the issues when your surface is a little bit too high. So a couple things to consider there. So with your mouse, I'd like you to put your hand on the mouse that you're using now, and then I want you to scooch it a little bit closer. So make sure that it is close to the midline of your body as possible. I want you to pull your elbow in to the side of your body so that you're not reaching for the mouse. And then I want you to slide your hand up the mouse a little bit just to make sure that the full weight of your hand is resting on the mouse. The heel of your hand can be touching the table, but the weight shouldn't be in the heel. The weight of your hand should be right on top of the mouse. This is going to allow you to sort of move your arm with some sort of regular movements rather than just sort of that side-to-side motion that happens to the mouse when you are restricted by your hand really being planted on the table there. So again, pull your elbow in close, make sure your forearm is still parallel with the floor, and make sure the weight of your hand is well fixed on the mouse. If you can't rest the weight of your hand on the mouse may be too small based on the size of your hand. Okay, so again, just up onto the mouse just a little bit in order to make sure the hand is well supported, and then movement of the mouse is going to come not from the wrist, but some contribution from both sort of the wrist, but also the forearm. Okay, so the next thing we're going to take a look at is the monitor. And your ergo fact for the day is that your head weighs 10 to 12 pounds, which is similar to that of a bowling ball. Anytime that you look up, look down, rotate your head to the side, your bowling ball is no longer balanced well on your spine, and your neck muscles have to kick in order to kind of support it and prevent it from rolling in a direction that you're not intending. So this is why the positioning of a monitor is so important, and why using an external keyboard and mouse with your laptop to allow you to raise the laptop up to the correct height is really important, so that you can properly balance your head or your bowling ball on top of your spine. So the rule of thumb here is that the top of the monitor should be level with your eyes. So not the middle of the screen, but the top of the screen. Nothing that you look at with any kind of regularity should be higher than your eyes, because that forces you to lift your chin and off balance your bowling ball. Now, if you are wearing a bifocal, a progressive lens, any kind of lens where you have to view your computer screen through the bottom portion of your lens, then you will find you need to set your monitor just a little bit lower. Basically, keep lowering it until you find you can see everything without pulling your chin up towards the ceiling. Your monitor should be directly in front of you. You want to minimize how much head rotation you have to do over the course of the day, and it should be at about arm's length. But that's really a vision question. It's really about kind of where your eyesight functions best. Okay, so in the short term, if you've taken your laptop into a conference room or up to the dining room table because you're supervising somebody who's doing some homework, you can try putting your laptop on top of a 3-ring binder. This tilts the screen just a little bit higher so that your head doesn't have to bend quite so far to look down. And again, you're taking advantage of that kind of upward angle that your arms are already on if the table is a little bit too high. But in the long term, we're really looking to achieve this image on the right, where the laptop is on a riser, the top of the screen is level with eye height, and the forearms are parallel with the floor at that 90-degree angle, typing on an external keyboard and an external mouse. Now, we all like to have a little bit of variety in our day. If you're somebody who works from home, sometimes you can feel like you're staring at the same wall for, extended periods of time. And so, there are opportunities to add some variety into the way in which you work. So this might mean working at a kitchen counter. You can see here, I've got 2 people both on kitchen islands. The fellow is a lot taller, so he's had to put his laptop up on an Amazon box to get it to elbow height, whereas my colleague Kristen is quite petite, and so she only needed a cookbook in order to get the keyboard at elbow height. But people have been really creative. They've created standing workstations out of ironing boards. It doesn't matter how you achieve this. You're just looking to try to get into those ideal postures again. And the less ideal your workstation is, then the less amount of time you want to use it. So these 2 kitchen examples, obviously the monitor is still too low. You wouldn't want to spend 4 hours a day at this workstation. But if once or twice a day you go up, you work at a island in the kitchen for 15 or 20 minutes just for a break and a change of scenery, a way to sort of use the body and the muscles in a different way so that we don't overly stress a particular body part, then that is a great way to incorporate some variety into your day. So again, these are kind of the 2 ideal postures that we're looking to achieve. Body is upright, it's supported, the elbows are tucked in close to the body, the head is well balanced on top of the spine. Now, if you're looking for some opportunities to sort of relay some of this information to employees who work for you, I just wanted to let you know that we do have an online kind of e-learning module with OHS Insider and Safety Now. It's a great kind of cost-effective way to get everyone up to speed. There's 5 modules. They're each under 5 minutes long. covering chairs, keyboards, mice, monitors, sit-stand desks, and kind of some general wellness with videos and little quizzes, and you can track who's completed it in order to ensure that kind of everyone in your organization has gone through your sort of required office ergonomics training. So that's a great resource available for you if that's something you're interested in. Now, if we sort of take a little bit of a step away from sort of traditional offices, but we still consider the use of devices, whether we're using them at work or we're at home, we know that they do present some risk, in particular to the neck, as a result of this forward head position. So if you take your 12-pound bowling ball, you tip your head forward 30 degrees, your 12-pound bowling ball is now the equivalent of a 40-pound load on the muscles of the neck. So, you know, this can create a lot of issues. People have started referring to this as tech neck, kind of the pain that comes with that. So, you know, the same principle applies. How can you readjust the way that you're working to get the head better balanced on the deck? And maybe this is putting an iPad on a stand, either for yourself or for your children, if you're going to be there for slightly longer periods of time in order to get into these better working postures. Now let's take this a little further and consider some more things at home. So the ideal posture at home is still one that's upright and with the arms close to the body. However, the optimal height at which we choose to work is going to depend on the kind of task that we're doing. So if you're changing a watch battery, you would want the work to be a little above elbow height so that it would be closer to your eyes and easier to see. However, if you're chopping a really tough vegetable like a squash or a turnip for your Thanksgiving dinner, you're going to want that surface to be a little below your elbow height so you can lean into it and you can generate some more force to get through that tough vegetable. So we need to kind of consider that, you know, light work, that's our keyboarding, is done at elbow height, and then you either need to shift things higher or lower depending on whether that task is either lighter and more visually intensive than typing on a keyboard, or physically requires more force than typing on a keyboard. So in your kitchen, depending on how tall you are, this might mean stacking a couple of cutting boards to get the work to the right height. Or you might want to take a moment to decide, you know, where you're going to store items in your pantry or your garage shelves based on how much they weigh, how often you need to use them. So some general rules of thumb for any kind of handling is that we do want to store things between knee and shoulder height. This is often referred to as the power zone. We know muscles are strongest in this zone. We can use our legs, which are our kind of biggest muscles, in order to really generate force. And then the back muscles are not so much there to generate force, but really to support and stabilize the spine in whatever posture we have adopted. So consider kind of where you store things based on that consideration of a power zone. As much as possible, we want, when you're generating force, to have two hands on an object. So lifting, carrying, two hands on the object, and the body must stay square. So being square means that you're not twisting. So your toes, your hips, and your shoulders are all facing in the same direction. As soon as your toes are pointing in a different direction from your shoulders, you have created a twist about the spine. And when you do that, you put the spine at substantial risk because the support structure around the spine is not even, right? You've got kind of tight muscles on one side and loose muscles on the other side when you create that kind of twist about the spine. Now, when you're making choices about how to handle things and how to move things, you know, you can kind of consider this order of operations as being helpful, which is that you would always choose to push something before you would choose to pull it. Pushing allows you to generate more force. You can get your entire body weight behind it. You can do it with a really nice and square posture. And most of the times it gives you better visibility for what you're doing. You can see where you're going. So pushing should almost always be your first choice. If you can't push something, then consider whether you can pull it. And only if you can't do those two things should you consider lifting and carrying a heavy object. So let's look at some examples for lifting at home. So, you know, some things that we probably do without even really giving much thought to it is, you know, when you carry your groceries in from the car, dividing the load between two hands. So half the bags in each hand rather than all the bags in one hand and your house keys in the other hand, right? Which creates kind of an uneven load on the spine, which the spine is not going to be able to manage nearly as well as if we just distribute that weight more evenly. Also, sometimes it's a matter of just taking multiple trips and asking for help when you need it. You know, if you consider how debilitating low back pain can be, the 30 seconds that you saved by trying to do everything all in one trip is really not going to prove to be worthwhile if you put yourself in a situation where you can't get out of bed or can't tie your own shoes the next day. One of the most common errors that happens when people lift is sort of the maintenance of the low back curve. So there's a real tendency to round the back, which we talked about how that stretches the muscles of the back and it puts a lot more strain on the ligaments. So you can see in these two images that in the second image that sort of natural dip in the low back has been maintained. And this happens as a function of pushing the hips back behind you and pulling your chest up when you lean forward to do a lift. So this is a really great kind of motion even to practice without loads in the hand in order to make sure that you are maintaining this low back curve. You're maintaining that really nice even pressure through your discs, through those jelly donuts when you're performing any kind of lifting activity. This is something that we find that people often really struggle with. So again, some other things that you can consider doing to kind of practice these things is you can do it kind of against a wall at home, really practicing pushing your hips backwards. You can practice sitting back into a chair and just kind of touching your bum to the chair and standing back up. But again, it's a really important movement to ingrain in the work that you do, whether, again, it's just unpacking groceries or whether you have a job where you are doing some material handling. If we look at pushing and pulling at home, this happens in all kinds of instances, you know, whether you're mowing the lawn, taking out the garbage, and you live in a municipality with these big giant garbage bins now. Again, keeping in mind that the goal is to keep the body square. So if you're mowing the lawn, you know, traditionally that is quite square. It's a two-handed pushing activity with some two-handed pulling, but you might sometimes have only one hand on the lawnmower. You might be trying to get around a bush and you kind of push it off to the side. Again, when you're not exerting that pushing force straight forward out of your body, you are not going to be as strong. So we're trying to avoid the sort of generation of force out on an angle away from the body or pulling things laterally in order to, say, turn your lawnmower around. So instead, you would take a couple of steps forward and backwards in order to sort of do that rotation rather than just sort of forcefully pulling the lawnmower across the body in order to rotate it. Same thing with the garbage can here. If this garbage can has load, has like some weight in it, then pushing it with two hands is a better idea than pulling it. Again, when you do an activity like this with one-handed pulling, you're creating torsion about the spine because the load is all through one shoulder, so there's more demands on the shoulder, but also that pulling on the shoulder sort of has a tendency to rotate the upper body a little bit, so you get that twisting activity in the spine, which again, the spine does not handle twisting motions very well. If you're doing cleaning activities at home, you know, we ergonomists in particular love a long-handled tool, you know, a dusting mop with an extendable handle, extendable handles for, you know, shower cleaning and those kinds of things. Anything that's going to reduce how much reaching and how much bending you need to do. I, you know, highly recommend if you have children, you know, they're short, they're closer to the ground. I like to sort of task them with the picking things up off the floor and those types of activities that are low to the ground, but I don't necessarily want to do myself. I'm a little bit on the taller side. One of the things that I sometimes find challenging is if you're doing a lot of dishes, the bottom of the sink can be too low for many people where you feel like you're really sort of forward bent in order to kind of access those dishes that are sitting on the very bottom of the sink. And so sometimes what I'll do is I will put something in the bottom of the sink as kind of a buffer or a riser, and then I'll put my plates and things on top of that, like metal rack or something that I've put in the bottom of the sink. I'm just trying to raise the bottom of the sink up a little bit so that I'm not bent so far forward as I'm doing this. And really, I'm only probably bothering to do this if I've got to scrub a significant lasagna dish or something where I think I'm going to be at the sink for a little while, or I've had a dinner party. The other thing is really to consider, can you vary your tasks? I don't maybe do all of my vacuuming on the same day. I might vacuum one floor. I'm spreading it out. I'm alternating between vacuuming and dusting, whatever you can do to incorporate more variety. We're trying to ensure that we don't overstress a particular muscle in a very sort of similar way over and over again. We want to incorporate as much variation in how we stress and place demands on muscles to allow it to recover and not fatigue as substantially. One of the things that I will say, kind of with having practiced as long as I have in the field, and also the fact that I am a lefty, is that I do think that left-handed people can sometimes be at an advantage here, because I do think lefties are better at alternating to hands when they do tasks that get fatiguing, because as a function of the world not always working well when you're left-handed, you learn to do a lot of things with your right, because potato peelers and scissors and all of those things don't work properly if you use them with your left hand. I think people who are right-handed oftentimes will start to experience some pain and discomfort. Maybe they've got some shoulder discomfort or some wrist discomfort. And then what happens is they accumulate some fatigue in that muscle while they're at work. And then they go home and they use their shoulder or the wrist to prep dinner and do cleaning and all of these things at home. And they're continuing to stress those same muscles over and over again. So the question becomes, when do we give those muscles an opportunity to rest and recover if we are only using basically that one side of the body? So you have to think about, how can we better distribute the workload that we put through our muscles over the course of our lifetime? And so maybe there's some opportunity to teach your left hand how to do some of those tasks that are not so fine motor critical, in order to kind of help you distribute some of that load a little bit better. And the other is just to pace yourself, to give yourself time, to take breaks. There are activities that are very traditionally give people issues with their low back. One is like the, May 2-4 weekend in the spring, where people are so sick and tired of the winter, they get out and they just garden, nonstop for a full day, and then wake up and really have some regrets the next morning because their back or their legs are killing them because we don't pace that work. The other task that has a tendency to get us because we don't pace it well is snow shoveling. And I do apologize for uttering the word shoveling in October, but listen, it's coming. And what tends to happen is we wait for all of the snow to accumulate, and then out you go and you're shoveling, potentially wet, heavy snow that maybe has been sitting all day while you've been at work, has accumulated overnight, and we do it all in one go. So we don't pace this task. We're much better off to, do a little bit of shoveling as the snow falls. Sometimes it feels like you end up doing more shoveling that way, but it's the same amount of snow that has to be moved either way, whether you do it all at once or in smaller pieces. The other is shoveling is one of those tasks where that low back curve does not get maintained well. So you can see in this image, the hips are not pulled back, and so the upper back is very rounded. Also, we don't tend to shovel in a square manner, kind of with the forces being applied straight forward from our body. So if we consider that tip earlier about making sure your hips, your feet, and your shoulders all face in the same direction, and that the force is also going in that direction. In this case, the hip, shoulders, and feet are not pointing in the same direction, although kind of generally so, but the force is completely off to one side. So that places really substantial demands on the back. And shoveling is one of the things, if you have had a back injury, is a sort of riskier activity to undertake. So as much as possible, we want to try to maintain that good technique. And as you fatigue, the technique is the first thing that goes. So our technique degrades as we fatigue. And so if you are starting to fatigue and you can't maintain good technique, then that's a great sort of reminder to go inside and have a hot chocolate or a cup of coffee and then come back out a little bit later. The other are things like snow pushers to push as much snow as possible, even those really giant snow pushers that will allow you to kind of push snow up and over a snowbank onto your lawn are great because you are not lifting the load. Again, pushing is safer than lifting, so we want to do as much pushing as possible when it comes to these types of activities. The next one to consider is, how do we get into these same neutral postures when we're driving? And there are some really good handouts and tips on driving and ergonomics if you're someone who drives a lot for work or you have staff who operate part of a fleet. On the MSD prevention website from CRE-MSD. But this infographic kind of reminds us that the thighs should be well supported. So if you have some depth adjustment in your seat, you want that seat to come most of the way to the back of the knees in order to make sure that you've got support along the full length of your thighs, that your wallet is not in your back pocket while you're sitting, because that'll shift one hip up. And then again, the thighs are not kind of evenly supported. We create a little bit of a twist in the hips if we're sitting on something. The backrest, usually the angle should be somewhere in the 90 to 110 degree range. Again, we want to ensure that the upper back is rested against the backrest in order to allow some of those back muscles to unload, that the pedals are within a comfortable reach, so you're not stretching your knee or your hip in order to access the pedals. And then the sort of tricky one about the arms being relaxed, because there's a bit of a happy medium here. So you do want the arms relaxed, you want the elbows in close to the body and kind of headed back so that they are underneath the shoulder joint. But there is obviously a minimum distance, I think it's about 25 centimeters, that you do need to sit from the steering wheel with respect to airbag safety. So making sure that you've done that well and you're not sitting further than you need to from the steering wheel so that that reach is not kind of an extended reach, which will, result both in more loading of the shoulders, but also a tendency to kind of roll the upper back forward in order to better reach the steering wheel. So those pieces, the controls are within easy reach. And then the last one, which I actually think sometimes is quite tricky, is that the headrest is really supporting the head in a natural and upright position. So your head should be balanced in the place it naturally wants to hang. I know that when I have test driven cars in the past, once in a while you get in a car and it just feels like the headrest is thrusting your head and your chin forward. And that is not a head position that you want to be in. It might just be that the headrest in the car is not adjusted to the right height. It might be, when you're test driving, that this just is not a good fit for the shape of your body. But making sure, again, that that bowling ball is well balanced on top of your neck. For folks who have long hair clips, ponytails, these things can impact that head positioning in the car. And so, for long drives, taking those things out of your hair, again, so that your head is in a more natural position, is going to be a lot better to unload the muscles of the neck, but also to make sure that the headrest is going to do the job that it is supposed to do in the event of an accident. And this is also true of chairs that have headrests. They can equally push the head forward and kind of out of a natural position. So my personal preference is for a chair that does not have a headrest, or that has a headrest that is fully articulating. So you can shift it and move it wherever it needs to be. But when your chair just comes straight up and has a fixed headrest, the odds of that being in the right place for you and for it not to impede or impact kind of naturally where your head wants to fall, I find it, often doesn't work particularly well. Okay, so let's take a look at some additional things that we can consider in the kitchen. So we talked about pacing tasks. We've talked about kind of rotating the tasks that we do. The same is true in the kitchen, right? Don't do all the cutting or all the peeling at once. Kind of mix things up, assign some things to other people in order to, again, vary the way in which you're working. How sharp your knives are will impact how much force you need to apply. If you are really tall, consider using a thicker butcher block as a cutting board in order to get the surface to kind of a more comfortable height. Sometimes when I want a surface that's a little bit lower for something, I may even use my kitchen table rather than the countertop. I'll kind of move where I'm working depending on, you know, what height is going to be more comfortable. You want things with padded and comfortable grips, but at the same time, I will caution you against things labeled ergonomic. So, you know, there's lots of stuff out there, ergonomic knives, ergonomic can openers, ergonomic shovels. There are no requirements with respect to what a company has to do in order to market something as being ergonomic. Although I would argue that if they don't overcharge for it just a little bit, no one would believe that it's ergonomic. So generally the price tag is also a little higher with a quote unquote ergonomic product. But as a user, you need to consider whether or not that particular product is going to help you get into a more ideal posture or is going to help you apply less force. If those things are true, then they may very well be ergonomic for you. But you really do have to kind of take a step back and consider that. So I am always wary of hand tools, knives, things like that that have built-in finger dents that somehow classify them as being more ergonomic. If my hands are not the same shape or size as the person whose finger dents were used to design this knife, then sometimes you can get contact pressure from the ridges in those knives or in a tool that you're going to use in the garage. So sometimes having tools that don't have any sort of built-in finger dents does work better. But again, it depends on the size of your hands and how well it fits. So just take a step back, consider whether or not it's going to make your posture better, whether you'll be able to generate force better before deciding whether something is in fact going to make your life better and is in fact ergonomic. The same can be said that a product that might be ergonomic for one person may not be ergonomic for someone else. So someone with really small hands, somebody with really large hands, somebody who's left-handed, someone who's right-handed. It's really going to be individualized about whether or not that thing fits your body properly. Okay, so that's what I've got to say about ergonomics in the home. I want to take a couple of minutes just to talk about kind of how we care for our bodies, because that's going to impact how well our bodies can manage the demands and the stressors that we place on it every day. So let's look at some of the things that we can do in order to keep our bodies functioning optimally. So the first one is to make sure that you remain physically active. So this is a function of both stretching and strengthening, because we need to make sure that our muscles are well equipped to support the spine, allow us to get into those postures. Having muscles that are really tight will impact your ability to kind of do a proper squat lift with nice posture. So both strengthening and stretching are very important for that. When you're at work, make sure that you're getting away from your workstation every couple of hours. And at the very least, you're getting out of your chair every 30 to 60 minutes. So, you know, when someone phones you, you can get out of your chair, take the phone call. Oftentimes you don't have to consult your computer at the same time when you're on a call, and you can walk around your office a bit. You can pace while you're sitting in a webinar like this in order to get up and out of your chair. And really, we just continually want to encourage people to make sure that they've taken the time to set up their workstation. You know, we have a tendency, we either come into work or we sit down at our home offices. We just sort of work with what's there, and people don't take the time to readjust a workstation if they have, you know, a new monitor, a new chair, somebody else sat at their desk yesterday. And, you know, discomfort is cumulative. The wear and tear that we place on our bodies every day, it adds up, and it adds up very slowly in a way that is often not noticeable. So people won't prioritize their health. They won't prioritize setting up a workstation because nothing is bothering them today. The problem is the choices that they're making today about how they work are going to impact what their health looks like 5 years down the road. So we really need to remind people that this is important, that they need to take the time, they need to set up their workstations properly. If you've got hoteling workstations or hybrid stations at work, you know, it's great to have a little photo infographic that you can post at the hoteling workstations that remind people to set them up properly and have some tips on how to set up those workstations. And I will give you a sample in our takeaway package today of one of these that you could post at hybrid stations that you can send to people electronically. And then again, we want to ensure that people know how to get equipment if they don't have something that they need in order to be able to work in an ideal posture. With respect to stretching, it's important to stretch slowly to the point of tightness, but these things should not be painful. So if a stretch is painful, you should stop and you should not do it. Stretching should not look like bouncing the way it did a few decades ago. So it should just be a slow and gradual stretch. And obviously, be aware of your own limitations. So if you are under the care of a physiotherapist or someone for an existing condition, do the things that they have told you to do, not necessarily the things that I'm going to suggest here. But I do want to show you a couple of stretches and things that you can do at your workstation during the day. Again, the idea is not necessarily that you would spend 30 minutes stretching at the end of the workday, because listen, who's got the time or the energy to do so? This is more about, every hour I do one stretch when I get up and out of my chair. And then over the course of the day, I sort of prevented that cumulative strain from accumulating so heavily over the day, because I'm sort of breaking it up as it comes. So I'm going to give you an example of a few. I'll talk you through these. We're not going to do them for 15 seconds each, because I recognize people have places to go and other meetings they need to do today. So neck stretches could be done in either sitting or standing. If standing, you should be standing with your feet shoulder width apart, and make sure that you breathe. This is not something we do while holding our breath, because obviously we don't want people getting dizzy. So the first stretch is that you drop your bowling ball, your head, chin down to your chest until you feel a stretch along the back of your neck, and you would hold that for 10 or 15 seconds. The next is that you would go ear to shoulder. This helps to stretch out your neck and your traps, that muscle where we tend to carry our tension over the course of the day. So ear to shoulder, you hold that for 10 or 15 seconds. And then by the same token, ear to shoulder in the other direction. And then the last one is just a rotation where you turn and look over your shoulder. Obviously, maintaining this range of motion is going to be really important for our ability to drive and check blind spots. The next set are for the upper back, kind of shoulders, chest. So the first one I'm going to show you, you would clasp your hands out in front of you, push forward and round your upper back. So really nice stretch should be felt between your shoulder blades. And then you could do a very similar stretch, clasping the hands together and then pushing your hands up and towards the ceiling in order to feel that through your shoulder joints. And the last one is one to really counteract that forward rounding that sometimes happens when we're sitting at our desk. And that's to really stretch out through the front of the chest and the shoulders and to kind of reach your arms behind you. So you can clasp your hands behind you if you've got really great shoulder range of motion. You can just kind of reach out to the sides and back. Some people will do these in a door frame and kind of tuck one arm on either side of the door frame and lean forward a little bit in order to get a nice stretch through the shoulders. For the low back, one of the things that we know that happens with prolonged sitting is that we start to get that sort of forward rounding. So a great way to counteract that after you've been sitting for a long period of time is to put your hands on your hips and to do a really gentle back bend. The head should not get tipped too far backwards because again, it weighs a lot. And this back bend is really gentle. In particular, this back bend is actually very helpful if you've been sitting in a vehicle for a long period of time. You get a lot more kind of rounding and stretching of the back when you sit in a vehicle. And so if you're going to hop out of that vehicle and help somebody move some furniture or unload a ton of groceries from your car, or you work in an industry as a delivery driver, then we always encourage people when they hop out of a vehicle after they've been sitting there for some time to do a gentle back bend before they start lifting, to kind of counteract that rounding and stretching of the back and better prepare the back to sort of support us when we start to do material handling and lifting activities. And then the last one to show you here are some for the legs. So the first is a calf stretch. So you can do this kind of leaning against a wall, but you're just stepping one foot back behind you and pressing that back heel down into the floor as you lean your hips forward, so that you feel that all down the back of your leg, all the way down to the ankle. And then the last is a hamstring stretch. So you can do this on a step that you might have at home, standing on, like the flat ground at the bottom, just placing one foot up onto the step and then tipping those hips backwards, making sure again that you're keeping your hips square and you haven't rotated your body at all. And then that stretch is felt a little bit higher up along the back of the thigh. So those are great things that you'll be able to do. Again, the idea is that you just pick a couple, you do them, you do one an hour, you just get a little bit of variety in the day and you prevent too much tension from accumulating. The last comment that I want to make is that, our physical well-being or our well-being in general is not solely about physical health. And so, mental health is really important as well. We've really recognized that. And there's been a lot more discussion about mental health over the last couple of years. And so, it's important that we keep an eye on the things that we can do to protect our mental health and sort of keeping an eye on those around us as well. And that's things like maintaining a routine, getting dressed every day, getting outside, going for a walk, checking in with colleagues so you don't realize that a whole week has gone by and you haven't spoken to another human being. And these days we really have to work harder to find opportunities to build collaboration with other people because it can be harder if we're not in the same, physical space. And then being aware kind of within your own company what resources are available. So if there are EAP programs or any of those things, reaching out, getting some assistance, if and when available to you. And then again, offering it to those around you if you feel that somebody else might benefit as well. So that brings me to the end of sort of the bulk of this today. I have a few other things I just want to say, but I'll encourage you if you want to start throwing some questions into the question box. So I'll give you kind of a head start on getting those typed. But I'm going to encourage you, if you'd like to receive these 2 toolkit cards and our presentation handouts, you can send me an email at info@ergoconsulting.ca and I'll get those out to you in the next 24 hours or so. Again, these 2 toolkit cards are electronic. You are welcome to share them with employees. They're great to post at hybrid workstations and things like that. And I'll put this email address up again at the end. But please stay in touch with us. Feel free to kind of join us on Twitter or find me on LinkedIn. We do send out newsletters 4 times a year with lots of great articles and advertisements for these kinds of webinars and workshops and things like that. So thank you all for your time today. I'll leave my email address up here, but Rory, maybe you can help me with any of the questions because it doesn't look like I can see them.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for another great presentation, Rachel. I do have a few questions in the queue, and just a reminder, if you do have a question, just click on the orange arrow, expand the control panel, head down to the questions drop-down bar, type in your question, and hit enter.
And or send me an email if you have a question that you want to ask me directly. That's fine too.
Okay, first question here. How do you set up an office desk with more than 1 monitor?
Okay, so if you have 2 monitors, there is a single question that has to be answered before we can get there. And that is, do you use them equally or do you use your monitors one more than the other? So if the answer is you have 1 monitor you use as your major monitor and then one you're using less often, so say a 70-30 split, then you would take your 70% of the day monitor, which should be your big monitor, not your little laptop, and you center it in front of you as if it was the only screen that you have. Your second monitor that you're using, say 30% or 40% of the time, goes to the side and is angled in. It goes ideally on whichever side is your dominant eye. So if you know which eye you use to throw darts or play pool or any of those things, that's your dominant eye side, your stronger eye. And the extra monitor kind of goes over there and they are right close together so the 2 sides are touching. If you use your monitors equally, say a 50-50 split, then the joint between the 2 screens should be centered with your nose. So if you look straight forward, you're looking at the joint between the two screens, and then they're kind of on equal each side and both angled in slightly in order to minimize how much time you're spending with your head rotated in any given direction. The two monitors also same height, same viewing distance, otherwise it's quite demanding on the eyes. If one monitor is bigger than the other, set the height of the larger monitor, and then your smaller monitor, you sort of split the difference. So the middle of the screen is horizontally level with the middle of the larger screen.
All right, thank you. Next question here is, what are your thoughts on ergonomic mice for computers?
So I've got a bag of like 15 mice. So I mean, you'll be able to see a little bit. Like I've got a mouse that looks like this right now. I've got a mouse that looks like this right now. I actually don't use a traditional mouse. I use a roller mouse at my own desk, which is a two-handed mouse. So I do believe that there is a time and a place. Again, the question about what makes a mouse ergonomic is really about whether it's well designed and fits you. So a mouse has to be well sized for your hand. That being said, 90% of people operate just fine with a regular traditional mouse. Only usually people who have medical issues or very large hands really require kind of things outside the general spectrum. But some of the mice that are rotate your hand from fully flat to a little bit vertically rotated can be really nice. They also range in price quite heavily. So I happen to have a Kensington, I think it's called a ProFit mouse right now, which is a semi-vertical mouse. It's like a Staples kind of mouse, easy to source. And I quite like it. A lot of people have used it and I've had really good feedback. So I do think there is a time and a place for them. The only thing I would say that you should avoid is anything that's really tiny. So no travel-sized mice, because they're not big enough to fit the hand properly.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have lots of reviews of many of the mice that we have tried on our blog, so you can take a look there, or if there's a specific mouse you're interested in, you send me an email and I'll let you know whether I've tried it or have any thoughts.
Cool, thank you. Next question here. Can you speak about reclining to look at an iPad or laptop and how good that is or bad?
Yeah, okay, so one of the things you can do to avoid kind of like, if we're talking iPad, in order to avoid that like forward head position where the bowling ball wants to roll, is that you recline, but the trade-off is if you recline and your head is rested on the couch, you're gonna unload your neck, but then you have to lift your arms up to support the weight of your iPad in your arms. So you're basically trading neck discomfort for potentially some shoulder loading. So not ideal for short periods of time. Again, postures don't become as critical when we're doing them for short periods. So you could alternate between the two, so you're not spending a ton of time in each. But again, if you're going to be doing this for hours, things should be set up properly. Same thing if you put your laptop on your lap and you sit on the couch and you lean back, there's no lumbar support. It's not great for the spine because you're going to get that rotation of the pelvis and the rounding of the low back, and then that compression through the spine. And you also will end up still with a kind of forward head position in order to see the screen of the laptop. So it will unload the neck for short periods, so you can use it to kind of mitigate what's going on, but it's still not a great strategy because it comes with really not great back support and some potential risks for the shoulders.
Okay, next question here is there any legislature on sit-stand desks? Is it still up to the company, and is the company liable in the case of staff injury?
Okay, so there are no regulatory standards for ergonomics at all. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act, at least in the province of Ontario, does not stipulate anything about ergonomics. It simply says that an employer has to ensure that they protect people's health and safety, i.e. they have to have the equipment that they need. I know that in the province of BC that is a little bit different. There are some more specific kind of regulations with respect to offices, but I do not know of any that actually would indicate whether or not somebody should have, like, the decision would always be kind of case by case, you know, is it in someone's best interest or not to provide them with a sit-stand desk. I don't know that an employer is ever required to give somebody a sit-stand desk. In the event somebody is injured using a sit-stand desk, that's a legal question. I don't know the answer. I have not heard of that because I have heard about concerns about pinch points when two sit-stand desks are next to each other. So I guess my thought is that if someone got injured because they got pinched by their sit-stand desk, they probably could still submit an injury claim. But generally in Canada, that doesn't allow you still to sue anybody. So that's all I know about that. I'm sorry, I can't provide any further information.
Great, thank you. That looks like all the questions we have for today. So thank you, Rachel, for some thoughtful answers, and thanks again for a fantastic presentation. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the recording will be available on OHS Insider. For a resource package, just remember to email Rachel. Her email is still up on the screen there, and she will send that over to you. So thank you all for attending. I hope you all have a safe and healthy day. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.